Welcome back, boys and girls. In this episode, I'm taking another great story from that magnificent newspaper, the Eastern Daily Press, or EDP as it's known. Apparently, Attleborough Town Council, are to use taxpayers' money to pay for therapy sessions for their councillors. More after the intro. It's because I'm a Londoner that I love Norfolk so. So here we are then, we're going for another walk up the BVR or Bure Valley Railway. This time though, of course, it's early summer and you're going to see the fields as they begin to bloom. So this video then is a continuation of where I left off in Chapter 2, Episode 9. Which is walking up amongst the summer fields, yes, but also carrying on talking about my coach driving days in the early 70s. So, according to this article in the EDP, the wonderful people of Attleborough Town Council are spending so much time slagging each other off and infighting and bitching and so on that they now need therapy to relieve them of stress. And of course, the taxpayers are going to pay for it. Stress management lessons. Would you believe you couldn't make this stuff up, could you? I mean, how hard is it to be a town councillor or a parish councillor? All you've got to do is decide on the colour of the flowers you're going to put in the planters. No need to start throwing bricks at each other, surely. There was an episode of The Simpsons, that popular cartoon series years ago, where they have a council meeting. And in the council meeting, the boss councillor says, "Can't we have a single meeting that doesn't involve the digging up of a body?" I thought that was funny, but apparently it's very close to the truth. Now this is a longer video than normal. As I say, I want to carry on talking about my coaching days. But this is one of my Norfolk morning walks, early morning, to avoid any people. There is the occasional school run that can knock you into the bushes, but other than that, it's all very peaceful and quiet. So I'm walking up this path that we're walking on now one day, and sitting at the side there's a frog. And the frog says to me, "Hey there, old boy, if you pick me up and kiss me, I will turn into a beautiful woman." So I picked up the frog and I stuck it in my shirt pocket. I was walking along for a bit, and the frog says, "Hey, don't you want a beautiful woman?" And I said, "Look, love, at my age, I'd rather have a talking frog." So as I told you, in Chapter 2, Episode 9, that small North London coach company, I wasn't there very long. I got headhunted to go to a much bigger, much more professional organisation. And on that first day, when I got there, I got back to the office and I said to the governor, "Well, that's it, governor, I've done my day's work." But he didn't know me name. And he said, "Oh yeah, all right then, Colonel, thanks ever so much, see you tomorrow." And it was at that very moment my nickname, the Colonel, was created. Now you will remember that I told you when a driver like me moved from company to company, that you would take loads of work with you, valuable asset to the company that employed you. So it didn't take long, a few weeks later, or maybe a couple of months, he sent me up to Scarborough to pick up my brand new coach. Yes, brand new coach, 100 grand's worth. And on the front, on that panel at the front, which I show you here in this picture, he had the Colonel written on that panel. So that was it. I was known as the Colonel. All the London tourist guides and the UK tourist guides and the big powerful companies that used to operate the tours all knew me as not as Davy, but as the Colonel. Now I still have my little sign which was stuck above my head on the interior of the coach that said, "Introducing your driver Davy," and they passengers called you Davy, but the rest of the world I was the Colonel. It didn't take long for the governor of that firm to start naming other coaches, because the driver said, "Well, if he's the Colonel, I'm the fucking General." And sure enough, it stuck. All the new coaches came home with names like Colonel and Captain and so on. So that was it for the next few years. This was the backbone of my work. German tourists, American tourists, Japanese tourists, you name it, all the countries of the world. touring London and touring the UK. Back in those days, if you was a Japanese tourist and wanted to leave the country, you'd have to have at least the equivalent of £6,000 in your bank account before you would be issued with a passport. Times have changed, yeah? So these Japanese tourists then, they'd be on a whistle-stop tour of Europe. Absolutely exhausted they were. They were spending one day in each major city before flying home. Used to pick them up at 6:15 from London Airport, drive them into London to a hotel where they'd get about an hour to wash and brush up before on a full-day London tour. Absolutely exhausting. Then back to the hotel for about 5 o'clock, out for an evening meal at a Japanese restaurant in Grosvenor Square, and then taken back to the airport again at 6 o'clock in the morning, and where they were off to Paris. Accompanying them on the tour, of course, would be a bilingual tourist guide, Japanese normally. One such guide, well, we called him Jimmy because his Japanese name was unpronounceable, but he was the most accident-prone man you could ever meet. If he was going to bump into something or fall over, he would. An absolute source of entertainment on every trip. Then there was Miss Watanabe. All the coach drivers used to call What a Big Pair, because my God, did she have a big pair. She was quite lovely, no doubt about it. I can hear you calling out, did I? Oh, yes I did. Now back in the 70s, all Japanese young men, and some women too, were fascinated by the American Wild West. You know, cowboys and Indians and all that. They were absolutely fascinated by it. So when they got on the coach at 6:15 in the morning, I had to make sure that I was actually rolling a cigarette from a 2-ounce tin of Golden Virginia. Oh, they used to go nuts. A big gabble of Japanese language as they pointed and shoved and everything else. And of course, the first request I used to get from the guide, can I stop at a tobacconist on the way into London? Of course, yes, absolutely. But not one of these young Japanese men could roll a cigarette, and by the time we got to the hotel, all the 2-ounce tins of tobacco that they'd actually bought, and the papers as well, were lying on the dashboard. I'd have about £4 of tobacco to see me through. This then was the first of the 1 or 2 little fiddles that we used to carry out in an attempt to earn more money. I used to sell the tobacco to other drivers, of course. Every tin had been opened, but they didn't seem to care because the prices were knocked down. Another big fiddle was when you went to the big sites, you know, the Albert Hall or St Paul's Cathedral, stuff like that. There was always a Del Boy character, a guy selling dolls from a suitcase. Now they used to give us a £5 if they could get on the coach. That means we would delay the departure by a few minutes while they tried to sell a few of these dolls. These dolls were dressed up as beefeaters or London bobbies and so on. You could earn an extra 25 to 40 quid a week by allowing these Del Boy characters onto the bus. Germans, on the other hand, were easily manipulated because they demanded everything. They wanted it and they wanted it now. You turn them down and all sorts of magical things would happen. We wish to see Loch Ness. Sorry mate, you spent too long at lunch, we haven't got the time. But we wish to see Loch Ness. 5 minutes later, 40 quid on the dashboard. Okay, we'll go to Loch Ness. One occasion, which I'll never forget, was with a big German group and we were having lunch at a restaurant in Stratford-upon-Avon. And there was some altercation going on between the Germans and one of the waiters. I don't know what was wrong, but it was what the waiter did. He actually gave a Nazi salute, clicked his heels and goose-stepped out of the restaurant. Absolutely hilarious. Whether or not he kept his job, I will never know. American tourists, well, they didn't do whistle-stop tours. They were all 7-day or 10-day tours of the UK. Now, they were fun because you'd always get the Americans to buy all your clothes for you. And I'll tell you how we did it. We used to fit a substandard valve in the front near side tyre of the coach. These valves would actually melt at 62 miles an hour and would slowly deflate the front wheel, which was good because when you stopped, they would all groan because in America they had to wait while some union-controlled recovery vehicle would come and change the wheel. But the guide who was in on this would say, "Davey, the driver, is going to change the front wheel," and you would get an amazing round of applause. Now, we always used to make sure that the spare wheel carrier and the jacks and everything else were all well lubricated to make sure everything went smooth. But whilst you was underneath the coach extracting the spare wheel, you'd tear your shirt, rub your trousers in grease, generally make a mess of yourself. So when you came out and changed the wheel, they'd all see that you'd ruined all your clothes. Guess what? The next morning, you'd find 6 shirts, 4 pairs of trousers and so on laying on the dashboard. On every single one of these tours throughout the summer, Davey would have a birthday. Yes, the guide would announce it round about day 3 of the tour. It's Davey's birthday today. And of course, you've probably already guessed it, but on the dashboard the following morning would be a series of birthday cards. And of course, inside each one was probably $10. And of course, we used to share this with the guide. We'd have half each. Another firm favourite was the guide would announce over the tannoy that Davey, the driver, has just heard that he's the proud father of a 5-pound bouncing baby boy, which would of course erupt in thunderous rounds of applause, and of course up would go the tip. The small fact that I wasn't married or even in a long-term relationship didn't matter, did it? Now on one tour I had 25 of top German VIPs over in this country to observe IBM computers and other industrial sites. They were a good bunch once they got educated, but on the last night of their tour, they demanded at Peebles they wanted a traditional Highland dinner. That's all fair enough, isn't it? And that's what they got. Course after course after course after course, and of course a haggis, which was piped in by a traditional Highland piper. Magnificent stuff. But here's the thing. Do you wait for the piper to finish piping before you eat your haggis? Or do you start eating the moment this hot meal is put in front of you? Well, I didn't know. But looking round the table, I noticed all 25 of these VIPs were looking at me. And I realised they were actually looking for me to lead the way. Well, I know my table etiquette, believe it or not, so I started to eat, and sure enough, they all picked up that same knife and fork and started to eat as well. The rest of the meal went uneventful, but one of the waiters there at this restaurant, he whispered in my earhole, he was a Cockney, he whispered in my earhole, he said, when the cigar truck comes round, he said, can you take for me one of the big heavy cigars that's in a metal tube? And I said, yeah, sure. And that was it. Forgot about it for the next hour and a half. And all the wine flowed, and oh yes, and a good time was had by all. And sure enough, right at the end, around comes the wagon with the cigars on. And here's where I made the mistake. I'd forgotten that these people were all watching me for etiquette. So I chose the largest cigar I could see on the trolley and tossed it to the waiter who was standing at the side of the wall. Guess what happened? He was buried under 24 cigars. The poor bugger just stood there, frozen to the spot. But the maitre d' of the restaurant shot me the filthiest look you've ever seen in your life. Anyway, now it's time for your joke, and this one is about farming. A city couple, Jim and Fiona, bought a small farm to retire on, complete with 4 cows, but no bull. They wanted the cows to have calves, but couldn't justify the expense of buying a bull when they only had 4 cows. As luck would have it, the farmer just down the road ran a stud farm, and he had prize bulls. Jim thought he'd be neighbourly and go and introduce himself. Bob, this farmer next door, was really friendly, and when he hearing the problem Jim had come with cows but no bull, he offered a solution. I can see your problem and I want to help you. Things are a bit quiet here and I have a prize-winning bull that isn't being used as often as we would like. No, the problem is my wife. She's the business person and would never allow one of our bulls to service your cows for free. So here's the solution. My wife leaves for work at 8 o'clock each morning and returns at 6 in the afternoon. So if you bring your cows over at 9 o'clock and leave at 5 o'clock, she will never know. I'm sure the bull won't tell her. Bring them around on Monday morning, take them back Monday afternoon, and by Friday afternoon they are certain to be in calm. So Monday comes round and Jim loads his 4 cows into the back of his truck at 8 o'clock, drives on over to Bob's place, unloads the cows into the field with the prize-winning bull, and picks him up in the afternoon before wife gets home. He does the same thing every day, Tuesday, Wednesday and Thursday, but on Friday, Jim is hungover. He's had a little bit too much to drink the night before on Thursday and doesn't even get out of bed until late. He stumbles into the kitchen and mentions to Fiona that he had best skip breakfast until he's had loaded the cows onto the truck. Fiona said, "You don't need to. 3 of them have loaded themselves into the back of the truck and the other one is sitting in the front tooting the horn." Moving onwards then, it seems to me that if you have a look at YouTube nowadays, half the country wants to live out of a van. Some permanently living in vans and the other half have got luxury motorhomes. And where do they all go? Scotland. Well, let me tell you the difference between now and what it was like in the 70s. On the Tomintoul Road, there is a place called Braemar. And halfway through Braemar used to be a hotel. And we used to stop there at this hotel. In the morning, when you came down to breakfast, to sit by the window seat which showed the road, and the waiter would come round and say, "Yes, Davy, what do you want this time?" And I would say, "I'll have the trout." And then I would watch as the chef, complete with his, big white fluffy hat and his gowns and everything, would walk across the road with a fishing rod. I swear to you this is true. And a few minutes later, he would be walking back with a pair of trout, which a few minutes later would be served buttered on my plate. That's the difference between now and then. As we approach nearing the end to this particular video, it brings me up to the most wonderful year of my life. That was the summer of 1976. Now, for those of you that don't know, the summer of 1976 was one of the hottest on record. In fact, it broke the records. Hosepipe bands, you name it, it was all going on. And there was I, winging my way round the countryside with great parties of international tourists, and I had a whale of a time, let me tell you. Now, due to copyright restrictions, of course, I can't play you the music of 1976. You'll have to take my word for it or look it up on YouTube. The music was wonderful. It really does sum up that wonderful summer. So it came as a surprise to me when I collected 50 young Americans from the Sheraton Hotel in London to take them on a tour. I tried everything with the music to appeal to them, and then finally one of them came up to me and said, "Hey man, you got any Jim Reeves?" "Jim Reeves? That was for the old people." "No man, have you got any Jim Reeves?" Well, of course I did. And I dragged it out, and then I had to spend the next 3 hours listening to 50 young Americans singing "I Hear the Sound of Distant Drums." Apparently, Jim Reeves was born in their hometown, and he was some sort of god there. Then, of course, there was the young girls. Back then, all fresh-faced and bouncy, lovely little things everywhere you looked. Nowadays, they've got bones through their noses and tattooed eyebrows and all sorts of things. I know I'm an old man of 75, but let me tell you, life was just so much better then. So 1976, or rather the summer of 1976, was to be my last as a coach driver in London. because I'm afraid that old itchy feet problem had started again, and my love of Norfolk had started to recall, and I decided then and there that was it, I was going to move to Norfolk. So I quit the job, and that upset the governor a bit, but still, never mind. I also said goodbye to one or two little lady friends I had, loaded up the car, and I literally stuck a pin in a map, and it came out as Swapham. Swapham. And I thought I'll start there and see how I get on. When I got to Swapham on that Saturday morning, I started asking a few questions of people, and by lunchtime, believe it or not, I'd managed to rent a 350-year-old cottage in a village called Bradnam. Yeah, Bradnam. Lovely little tiny little Norfolk village. Absolutely perfect. I spent the afternoon on that Saturday wandering around trying to get some work, and I called in at a company called Swapham Coachways and said, "Have you got any employment?" And Stan, the governor, went, "Nah, mate, I haven't. But I do know a man who might be able to help you." And he gave me this number. I rung it, and the guy said, "Yeah, come along and see me." He said, "Have you got HGV?" So I said, "Yes, I have." And I went to see this guy on that Saturday afternoon. He said, "Can you drive a truck?" I said, "Yes, I can." Guess what? I was employed straight away. Now, I found it a little bit unusual that he'd already asked me if I've got a heavy goods vehicle licence, and then asked me if I can drive a truck. Well, that was a bit of an odd question to ask, until I saw the fucking truck. And so began the next phase of my life. For the next couple of years, I drove a truck for this guy in a completely new world for me. One minute, I was a top coach driver, and there I was, up to my armpits in muck, driving these trucks, and I loved every minute of it. Work? Well, it was building the East Dereham bypass on the A47 from King's Lynn to Dereham, and it was a good year, really good money, but you had to work hard. I'll tell you more about it in the next episode. I'm going to wind this video up now. I do hope you've enjoyed that little walk out into the summer fields around Wroxham, and I'll see you on the next one. So, I get an awful lot of things just walking up and down. See ya.